we used to hang out at hackathons on weekends as our way of like having fun. So we would still go out, have a couple drinks or whatever, but we would want there to be a North Star. It was a big surprise when we found out that after 3 months of this whole hackathon of making several stages, we did win the first prize across Canada. We still celebrate like Halloween every year just because when he got to Canada, that was the first time he didn't feel like he was poor because there was so much candy. I just had money to pay one semester's tuition and buy a ticket to UK. So that's when I left in 2012. So now we have several examples where like a construction company, before they buy concrete from a supplier, will make sure that, okay, from the 5 people selling us concrete, this one is 30% less CO2 than this one. Plans can be measured in decades, but execution is always measured in weeks. So if we can show something in weeks, when the first time we ever did anything, we were showing people things we've done in 12 hours in one day.
Abdullah, hi. So tell me, how did it all happen? What were the insights in the local context that pushed you to start? What were the problems that you originally were solving? And then did it evolve? Did the problems evolve?
Absolutely. Yeah, so there's four of us, so the four co-founders. We're all based out of Calgary. I only moved to Calgary in 2019, and I moved here to do a bunch of research at the University of Calgary. So I was going to do research for like my PhD in supply chain and heat transfer. So I was like trying to model like passive houses, so like not energy intensive houses, because I was born and raised in Pakistan, and it was a big thing was like we didn't have electricity. And I used to think as a kid that if only I had electricity, yes, I would play more video games, but people would be less angry, or people would be like more economically beneficial to the society as well. So, I kind of thought that those basic things would help a lot. So I spent my whole time like becoming an engineer and then got into research. But what I had to do along the journey was, because I'm an international student from a third world country, I had to pay my own tuition because my parents were like they weren't going to facilitate any of that, and I couldn't apply for loans and all those things. So I had my day job, which was like becoming an engineer and like, learning how science works and becoming a good researcher. But then the only way I could pay off the tuition was actually running my own businesses, because any country that I was in, so I was in UK before and then the US while I was studying engineering, I couldn't just pay off my tuition by working a per hour job. So I did try that, I did all the odd jobs, but I was still short. So I was like, I have to get creative here. So I got into like just helping businesses because I was good at a bunch of like technical stuff. And I ended up like helping a lot of software companies get projects, understand them, and be able to drive value. And that kind of like helped me pay off my tuition. And then after, when I came to Calgary, I was like, I really want to like merge the two. I've been doing this for like 5-10 years where I was, becoming a good engineer, but I thought that my background wouldn't be suited best if I just ended up taking a job somewhere, because I would be only working as an engineer, but I feel like I had such a perspective growing up that I should do something unique within. I started hanging out with a lot of like innovative and like entrepreneurial mindset like organizations in Calgary, and just kind of getting a feeling of like what it is to be there. And that's where I met my other three co-founders, was in the community. And the funny piece is that the Arbor was our third company together. So we were always going to create companies and we were always going to do something around it. But the time when I came to Calgary, they already had their first company called Core Design Factory. And it was essentially to help students on campus get jobs in the industry so that they don't have to work at a McDonald's. Like we thought that, if someone knew how to do stuff, then the industry should be utilizing them. And like, that's how they can build their portfolio and their real world learning. So I actually was hired on as an intern for the first company that we had. And I was told the ethos of the company is just to help people. And that's how essentially I got started with the co-founding group. And along the lines, we kind of realized that I kind of identified this problem with the business, was that we were paying the students $25 an hour, while the founders themselves were paying themselves like $4 an hour. So on the weekends, everyone was still doing odd jobs to make rent and all those different things. And I was like, like if we want to really help as many people as possible, we have to run it in a totally separate way. So that kind of converted into a software company called 99 Bits, which was essentially on the premise of we need to make money while we're helping people too, so we can do this at a bigger pace. So we ended up hiring those students to the company and then getting the projects ourselves instead of connecting the dots and doing all the work ourselves. And that was like a pretty good like real world experience for you. We were still at university, but we were spending now half of our time running the company and actually hiring a lot more students to be able to work as developers or engineers on a bunch of like technical projects. But we kind of knew that we never wanted to just to be a services company because we were all either engineers. So I was the engineer, and then the other three co-founders were computer scientists. So we were like, we want to build stuff every day and we want to build like cool things. So this is a great way for us to practice, what the world needs and like how to work in the real world and all those different kind of things. And right around that time is when actually like my co-founders and I've never experienced this personally before because I'm a third world country citizen, is I was offered an equal like co-founder like ship essentially because of my effort and what I brought to the table. And I kind of promised myself that, oh, I never thought of making other people money, but I'm going to really pay back the trust that the other co-founders have put in me, because I would have worked my ass off for even 5% equity, like they didn't have to make me an equal co-founder, but they still did. And that kind of like really elevated my passion in the process. And essentially like, and this is where Arbor starts, is we used to hang out at hackathons on weekends as our way of like having fun. So like, we were still like, go out, have a couple drinks or whatever, but we would want there to be a North Star. So for us would be just looking up what are some hackathons locally and going to them and just having fun and building something together. So that's kind of like one of the things that we did a lot just to build a good bond between ourselves. And Arbor was one of the things we created at one of the hackathons locally. It was by a bank called ATB. And essentially, we created it and we finished third in the very first competition, and we won VR headsets. And we're like, okay, this is awesome. Like, this is amazing. Like, we were really geeking out about our VR headsets. And it was really earlier on. It was like 2020 March. But then if you also know what happened in 2020 March was that a week later, COVID happened and everything shut down. Our clients from 99 Bits were like, we can't pay you right away. We have to make sure we make payroll. We don't know where the business is headed. And then we're like, okay, we have like 5 months of essentially rent money from 99 Bits. Like, what do we do now? And we had a list of ideas that we thought were really okay, but we wanted to like really nail down our ethos. So the first company that we had was, was around helping people. Second one was about helping people and also making money. And the third one that we feel like that wasn't part of our services company was having fun while doing it. That kind of was like, okay, if we can define what our, foundation is as a co-founding group, like what do we strive for? And those are the three things that we wanted to select as our values. The idea that matched all those values the most was Arbor. So we kind of like, we were like, okay, let's test out our theory if this is something the world is looking for or is something that will bring value. So we joined another hackathon, but this one wasn't a local one. This was a Canada-wide one called Microsoft AI Hackathon, and there were about 700 like companies that were joining this across Canada. And we thought that, okay, this one is more about like, it's more technical. It's less about just like, like creating good. And we want to test out our best ideas against like the best technologies, the best business model, and the best impact. Because we don't want to just say that because we create good impact, that we can have an okay technology and okay business model. Because we feel like the three put together is what our ethos was around, and like this is what will create maximize like value. And then essentially what we ended up doing was and this is like part of our confidence too, we just keep getting bigger with every stage, was that we weren't going to do anything, like we weren't going to accept anything less than the first for us to take this more seriously. So along this process we were still having fun, still a lot of late nights, a lot of hanging out together and building stuff for fun. And it was a big surprise when we found out that after 3 months of this whole hackathon of making several stages, we did win the first prize across Canada.
Nice.
And we're like, okay, this is something that we should take seriously, because all of us obviously had a good personal background in education and technology, but we'd never worked together to have some kind of something that was getting so much attribution and accomplishments on its own. And that is when we decided to join another hackathon. Hackathon being the WSA Young Innovators Award, because now we wanted to compete ourselves at a global stage. So we knew that within a sector, within a certain city, we were pretty good and we would stand out. And we finished third in that, but we were still like, okay, that's a good enough thing. And then we did the same hypothesis countrywide, and then found like even better results because we put more effort in, we took it more seriously. And then when we decided to join the WSA thing, we're like, okay, let's find out like if the third piece of it, which is like the impact side of things at a global stage, how do we compare at like the against all the other feel good companies and like all the other companies that have the right intent, but we still feel like, we had the best technology and a great business model to go with the best intents, which we thought was something that could stand out even at a global stage. So that's kind of how we got connected to WSA.
Awesome. I mean, it's such a huge story. And for me, the thing that is really interesting is the personal stories that go into it. Like the motivation to create impact. Where did that come from? Why was it important for all of you to really kind of create impact? Why?
It's a great question, because like all four of us have completely different backgrounds, and the reasons we do this are completely different too. So I'll give an example. Our CEO, Alex, he's someone who was a Bosnian refugee into Canada. So he moved here when he was like 9 years old. And we still celebrate like Halloween every year, just because when he got to Canada, that was the first time he didn't feel like he was poor because there was so much candy. So like, even though we're like, okay, not Halloween people, we still celebrate it because it means a lot for him for that purpose. And I know I don't want to speak for everyone, but I can speak from what I think, from what their reasons were. And Alex was someone that was he was like, there's so much technology in the world and there's so much bad in the world. And like technology is usually enabling the bad in the world. And that he was like, let's try to do something that is simple and straight to the point and it helps people, but it's not too complicated. And I came from a research mindset. So I was like, everything was too complicated and too complex. And I find like, engineers love working on hard problems rather than asking themselves if I should ask a different question and define the problem. So I found Alex to be like really, really have had a really good head on over his shoulders. And he was really like, he's like, this is why people would want to do this. And he understood both the bad reasons and obviously the good reasons that we were trying to, but it was all about like, how do we fit into this world with mostly bad impact intent, mostly driven by monetary value. And he had like a really tough upbringing for that. And then on the other side, Ben and Danny are brothers, and they grew up in Alberta, in Canada. They didn't really go out and saw a lot of those things like that are themselves. What really surprised me is that both of them never had a job, and they were the happiest people I had met, and also the most technically savvy people. Like Ben, especially our CTO, like I call him a god level developer because he can work at a capacity of 500 developers.
Yeah, wow.
Which means that any day he could have gotten $500,000, $1 million job at Apple, Facebook, or whatever company he wanted. But when I met him, he was selling water bottles off like auctions on the weekends to make rent and building software for fun. He wasn't doing it for the money. He was like, I just really like building new things and making them from the ground up. And I was like, wait, who does that with such a valuable skill in the market? Like, and you still don't make money off of it? And he was like, no, I do make enough. Like if I can make my rent, I'm happy. Right. And if I can make beer money, that's a great month. And that was like, and I was like, well, I've been like, I come from a very different background. So that was a very different perspective to me. And then I kind of realized that, so like one of the main things that happened that made us want to start an impact company was like the George Floyd moment in the US. So like, they were asking me these questions about things that they had never experienced. And I was like, these are really ugly things. I don't know if you even want to put that into your like memory, or like it'll probably make you a little bit sad in the process and all those things. And they were like, what's the purpose of us doing all these things if we can't really like change something,
Yeah.
right? And the funny part is that Ben and Danny were the ones who brought that to the table, not Alex or I, who come from third world countries. We're like, okay, let's make money and then we'll do charity on the
Yeah.
side. And they were like, no, we want to like merge this together. So that was kind of like their upbringing. Was they're both brothers, both really good developers, had always just been entrepreneurs when they were kids, like doing like lawn work or building software for like their dad's friend. They've been doing that since they were kids. And yeah, so lastly, I'm from like a small town in Pakistan, like it's a manufacturing hub. And I kind of grew up in the city when we had no traffic signals, like nothing that came from the first world country. Because
Mm.
when I was growing up, there was no internet, and that meant like you're totally closed off to that world.
Can I ask you
And
what
like
year is that? What year were you growing up in Pakistan, if you don't mind sharing?
I was there from like when I was born in 1995, and I was there till 2012, up until my high school graduation. And essentially, everyone in my family still lives there. They're still like originated there. And I was given an option. Like my dad was like, "Here's $10,000 that you can use to start your own business," which is what everyone else in my family did. Or you could take and put it towards your education, whatever that means. So, and I kind of was like, I don't want to start a business. And it's funny now that when you come full circle, I was like, I really want to be an engineer, because there'd been no engineer in our family before. No one like who went to university before. And then I was like, I was pretty good at being in school, but then I was like, I want to take it to a next level. I want to go to UK for my studies, and I didn't know what that meant, but I knew like I need to be like seeing new things and hearing new things from other people, not like biases or not like
Yeah.
what people's perspectives are. Because I was really interested in what is the ground truth, what is the like fundamental laws of the world, right? Like nothing that is more like painted as a picture. So I just had money to pay one semester's tuition and buy a ticket to UK. So that's when I left, was in 2012. Yeah, so I was there for all my life pretty much before I started my university education. And then from my university education, I stayed in UK for about 3 years, kind of realized that I like being in school and learning, but I couldn't afford it. So I took a research scholarship in the US just to do research for a while, not take any courses. That got me really interested into like just tweaking things, building technology. And then I graduated from the US. And that's kind of like a tough situation for me, is because like that's the year that Trump got elected, and I graduated in December when he got elected in November. So I had job offers that got taken back at that point, just because they didn't know like what was going to happen, because I was obviously a Muslim from a third world country and I didn't have any citizenship status. And then they were thinking that they'll have to pay a lot of legal fees and all those things for an employee that they haven't even trained yet or hasn't even been productive. So I moved to Calgary just to continue my research. I kind of realized that I can just hop countries and go to universities because of my education. So I kind of used that as a way to immigrate, which I couldn't immigrate normally because of all the laws. And once I came here, I was like, growing up in Pakistan, I didn't want to do business because I thought a comfortable job as a project engineer, somewhere I could make 100K, have good benefits, live the like ideal suburban life in North America. Like that would be the perfect life for me. But then when I realized that there will always be things that will be outside my control that would affect me, and like, did I really need 100K to live? The answer was no. So I was like, I'm good with research like stipends, as long as I get to do what I want to do with my time and like with my brain and put into like certain things. So when I moved to Calgary, I was pretty adamant that I'm going to combine the both like this for that reason. So I remember I still have the message on LinkedIn where I cold outreached Alex, our CEO, saying, "Hey, I've heard great things about you. Can I take you out?" Like the same cold reach messages I'm sure you get to from a bunch of people trying to like sell you. And I was just trying out anything possible. And that's how I ended up meeting Alex. And I was like, "Hey, I'm just really passionate about building stuff." And he was like, "Okay, I'll give you an internship. You prove yourself, and then we'll go from there." So, and I was like, "Okay, that's all I need to like get going. I don't need money from you. I don't need anything. I just want to contribute." So, yeah, that's kind of been like my journey so far, has been seeing the third world country myself, seeing the factories open up in the early 2000s, seeing what it does, to the region. I mean, if you go back now, like it's like you have everything from hepatitis A to Z there. And my girlfriend makes fun of me. They're like, no, there's no hepatitis D or E. I was like, I'm pretty sure I've seen them in banners in my city when I was growing up, like for testing, because there's like, it just continues on because there's so much water pollution and water diseases from the factories in the rivers and that kind of stuff. So anyway, so when we started Arbor, I knew of the problems that existed with global data. So these databases that people use to calculate carbon impact. And I'd be like, that's not how the impact is in Pakistan, right? Or that's not how the impact would be if it would be in China or if it would be in India. Like, yeah, sure, you can use a number, but you could be sitting in Europe or US or Asia or Africa, and you will all come with the same number. And I was like, how is it possible when we all know that the factories and the practices are completely different region to region, like where things are grown, where energy is cheaper. So I was like always in late nights when we were doing hackathons, I would go on these tangents with my co-founders, and they were like, let's just do something to address that. And yeah, that's kind of like how Arbor came around.
Wow, I probably would talk to you for 10 hours asking questions about all the different things that happened in your life and the things that took you to where you are right now, because I actually see some similarities between us. I was growing up in Soviet Union. I was born in Soviet Union in Lithuania.
Mm.
And for me, there was no question that I will actually go and study abroad and I will try to make a career outside of Lithuania, which had this ceiling. So it's very interesting to actually also touch upon those questions. But I feel that we need to talk about Arbor and what exactly do you do. So maybe if you could tell me the principles of how you do it, the impact that you're creating, but also tying it back, because from what I understood, your background in Pakistan and the way that you saw the world, the impact of the globalization of the kind of progress was that triggered Arbor, really. So can you tell the story about what does Arbor do exactly, but again, tied to your background?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I there's a couple things. One is my role at Arbor, which is like Chief Impact Officer, which I always tell people is a non-traditional way of how they've met other Chief Impact Officer, because my background is not in marketing or PR.
Yeah.
And I don't talk about things that are more vanity metrics. But what I do is like I build precision data models to find regional accuracy and make ground truth possible through these models. So like that's all I care about. And that's why like one of the main roles I play at Arbor. And I can tell you like the quick iterations that Arbor went through for it to be able to like happen that way. And I didn't know what my role was as co-founder, but I've kind of like identified that over time. And I play that at this point on a day-to-day. So the first thing was that we knew that like people didn't have access to data, and that the business folks that were the decision makers or the consumers with the money, like they were just looking at other things like certifications or packaging or something like that to make.
Yes, a question. When you say that they didn't have data, what do you mean exactly? Like in what sort of relationships?
Yeah, so I would say like there was like the research world that will create these databases, they will publish these papers, and then that's it. They are not involved in any of the other process. And the thing that makes scientific sense, they would just do it in that way, and then there will be a real world separated from it. So like when the scientists are working, they're working on, okay, what is the impact of climate change at a global level?
Yeah.
This is where we're headed. The business doesn't work at a global, they just care about their market, their supply chains, their value chains. Now, some of this data was so old that like I kind of knew like polyester oil data or polyester data or anything synthetic material data was from the 80s and 90s. The machinery that makes this has changed 5 times. The energy that powers them has changed that, the way that happens. And I kind of like looked at this and I was like, I'm sure everyone can see it like as much as I can. Like my supervisor could, like all these other people, but they weren't able to, like, they didn't have that influence on the real world to be able to say that, hey, we need to do something about it because it doesn't show real world impact. And it shows more theoretical impact, which you can write a good paper about, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I was really frustrated. I knew that me publishing a paper will not move anyone's life one bit and wouldn't change anyone's opinion about anything, right? So, and I kind of like, I was like, okay, the only way I could do it is by bringing real world value, is by giving people a certain comparative advantage by bringing access to that information. Now, in my mind, like I've seen from the third world country perspective all the way to like, now talking to, top 500 CEOs and all those things, right? It's the representation that is missing, because if people at the top don't even know this is a problem, they will never address it. And then that's what I kind of realized, was that no one went to school for this. The people that you hire for this didn't have an education about how to solve this. Everyone else like has a good education, they can look good, but this is kind of like a piece that was always like missing in my mind. So that's kind of like, with the first iteration of Arbor was we created like an ESG database, because we wanted to tie everything at every part of the supply chain. So if you buy a raw material, or if you buy a finished product as a consumer, you should have certain values that you can attribute to whoever's selling to you. So if they match those values, then you go ahead and purchase that. And we were trying to do it in everything, like encompassed into one. This is where I think my chief impact officer role started playing really an important role. Was we did an internal study where we got ESG data from a bunch of ESG data providers. And what we found out, that there was more correlation between ice cream sold and shark attacks than there was between the ESG scores of the same company by different data providers. At that point, you're like, we could go with the hype, we could create a lot of money, but would we be actually making a difference in the world, or would we just be peddling what is easy to peddle? And we took the hard decision, when ESG was the biggest #1 trending thing, to take a stand that this is not accurate, and then this is misleading, and that there needs to be more accuracy for each one of those things. Absolutely, those are all important things, but there needs to be more accuracy and representation of the ground truth, not qualitative metrics that just because you have X, you get a higher score. Like, that is too rudimentary for a global supply chain to be encompassed in. And then, so what we did was, then we moved around, like, okay, what about product claims? Like, you have to make these claims on the border. You have to make these claims. You can get into trouble if you make these claims properly. So we're just trying to think that, okay, how about we start from there? And then a big piece was that, like, my co-founders were like, let's do certifications. Like, if something is organic, or if something is like this, and we'll build our data models around it. And we started doing this, and I had this, like, again, my third world country representation was that I was like, I can promise you, and then you guys say that we should do certifications, I can see it in my head, the factory, what they do to get the certification. Because I have friends who own factories, I have family members who own factories, and then I also have seen it myself, where there's a factory that is certified that makes 5% of the yield of, and then there's a factory that's not certified that makes 95% of the yield, but they all come under the same factory name. And I was like, if we do this, then we're also part of the same problem. Yep. Like, we're also part of the old problem, right? So we did this like really tough exercise of building our own data models from the ground up, which was like, okay, this is, if Pakistan makes this much cotton, and if they are manufacturing a bunch of like jeans for Levi's, like, where does the cotton come from? Like, okay, 40% of it could come from within Pakistan, 30% is being imported from this country, and then linking everyone to their own CO2 footprint based on their regional practices and all those different kind of things. Because we felt like, yes, even though some regions may not have good data available, but if someone has a supplier there, they should be able to collect that data and then update the model, and then still be regionally accurate. So that's where we created this thing where you can get estimations really fast based on just regional attribution, that this is where the farm is, there's where the factory is, pretty much for any material or any product, which essentially allowed us to measure companies like CO2 footprint, or like certain parts of their supply chain, like their factories, or like the use of their products, or whatever that may be, like with way more accuracy. So that's what we kind of focused on, was that, okay, we can do all the values of ESG, because the data is not there and is going to take away from things where the data is there. So why not just do where all the businesses are going to do things first, and then use that to expand more data? So like, the aim for Arbor is still at some point to include things like waste, water, like acidification. And then I'm really excited about the social piece, but it needs to be as quantifiable and as regionally accurate as our emissions data, because that's where I want it to be like a certain standard, because even the emissions data wasn't available. Even though so many governments were working on this and so many researchers were working on this, they weren't solving these problems for the real world. So we felt like there was a huge gap. in people wanting to access this data. And we talked to a lot of people, and what we found out was that they would wait for a year, pay consultants $100,000, and then they'll get a report back. And we're like, in a world where we have automated cars driving on the roads and they're processing so much data and driving themselves, you're telling me that you can't figure out what data is embedded in your supply chain, and that because your consultant told you it's not possible, you're going to tell that to your shareholders too. So like, I kind of like now play that role of like, hey, better technology is available. It's not just for your marketing team, it's for your risk team, it's for your compliance team, it's for your operations team, logistics teams. People who make the decisions on your business every day need to have access to this information. So you don't just look at them at the end of the year and say, okay, we did good or we did bad. Every day that you make a decision has a thing that ties to that final number at the end of the year that would show up if you calculate the right way. But yeah, I don't know, I kind of went on a tangent, but that's kind of my role at Arbor.
No, but that is a very good tangent because it gives a lot of perspective. But like, how do you collect the data? How do you incentivize all those regional suppliers to actually somehow extract the data from their operations and put it into Arbor? How does that happen?
I think the thing is that like, you have to play into people's incentives. So I don't go around and tell people like, hey, you want to save the world? I'd be like, if I'm talking to a CFO, for example, I'll be like, you procure so many, like hundreds of millions of dollars worth of material. I'm not asking you to change your material. I'm not asking you to change anything, but have you ever done like CO2 to dollar correlation from your suppliers for the same material? And then they're like, wait, I haven't, right? And then that's a KPI they understand. If they can risk dollar ratio, or they can assign like some kind of metric to a dollar that goes on the balance sheet, simple and easy to understand for a CFO. So now we have several examples where like a construction company, before they buy concrete from a supplier, will make sure that, okay, from the 5 people selling us concrete, this one is 30% less CO2 than this one. And that alone is giving them the knowledge, giving them the education, but also making them make decisions with that information, which I think is more important than just giving them the knowledge, because I don't think we have time just to provide knowledge and just leave it at that. We have to empower the same actions they would do regardless, in the same speed, the same feasibility, but make them a competitive advantage. So like, they would love to throw that in a bidding process that, hey, when we were acquiring suppliers, this is how we are a better company. And I'm sure like that will win them more projects. But then again, if I didn't incentivize it to them, they wouldn't want to do it and they wouldn't want to market it. Yeah. So it's all about tying it to like people's real world, everyday decisions.
But when it comes to actually evaluating the suppliers, how do you know which of the 4 cement suppliers are actually less CO2 emission prone?
Yeah. So what we found out was that everyone was using like spend as like the way to calculate CO2. So they'll be like, okay, I spend $1 million on this thing, and then they'll just create an average number and then just do the math, and that was it. But what we do is like, we allow companies to collect data from their suppliers that is ingested automatically to our engine. But we also know they're not going to give you any valuable data. Like, they're going to give you very bare minimum data. So what we ask for is mass and weight based inputs. So like, not spend based. So we'll be like, okay, we think this is your feedstock based on like our data models. If you don't validate them, this is what we will assume, right? But then some of them go in and they'll say like, okay, I use this much of my raw material to make this, or this is my energy grid is connected to the country's grid, or do I have offsite grid? Like, they can go in and add these kind of things, which essentially builds up the accuracy of the calculation. So we're really good at filling in the data gaps. We have like aggregated secondary data. So you can select the most basic information that you put in on your website for your product. And that alone is enough for us to calculate the CO2 footprint based on worst case assumptions. So that essentially means that if you want a better number, you want to be able to collect more data. Because either that is true, or if that's not true, it is probably because it's worst case like situations happening in there. So that's why we've kind of found that, okay, people get what they want, but they also realize the transparency behind it. The data quality rating is lower. So like, in our system, every calculation generates a transparency page based on all the data that goes into that calculation, and then who provided that calculations. Most of the times it's our secondary databases. But what we found is like, some companies have a different kind of angle. Like, they want to give their suppliers renewable energy instead of changing their suppliers. So like that's where I'm having a lot of fun now working within the industry, is that, okay, I can tell you based on the 10 million products that you manufactured last year amongst the 15 factories, what is the percentage of emissions associated to each factory. That allows them to select the top three candidates to go in and put renewable like power facilities there and be able to counteract that level of emissions, which again I found it to be way more practical than just staying outside the box of business.
And who are your customers? Can you give examples of?
Yeah. So one of them in Canada is Canada Goose. They are using it for prototyping. So they're not using it to collect data from the suppliers. They're like, we don't even know what design decision, like decisions on design have influences on CO2. So they're making a lot of their products using our technology so they can do different iterations of different materials and find out if it reduces the CO2 footprint or not. And then we have HP as one of our clients. They are trying to figure out how to build digital product passports for their laptops for Europe. So essentially trying to figure out like what part of their supply chain do they account for in terms of CO2 versus their suppliers, because their suppliers are Samsung and Nvidia, and they're like, we want to say that this is coming from them and this is coming from us, and for what's coming from them, like they want to be able to reduce it eventually. And we have like, I'm trying to think which one you would know of more. In Switzerland, we have Scott Sports. So like a hiking, like a performance gear equipment company. They are using it because our like engine allows you to calculate even sub products. So like imagine they make a bike, you can then create a frame, you can create a wheel, you can create the chain, and then you can understand what the influence of CO2 is from all these components, and then you can try to swap them or stuff. So like they're just been a great customer, giving us a lot of feedback too. And then we have a lot of banks. We have customers in Japan. So it's like, it's weird. We have customers in Japan, and we have customers in Europe, and then we have customers in the US and Canada. So each region has their own. Yeah, each region has their own type of customer. So in Japan, it's a lot of big business, a lot of slow moving, but they bring the whole country together, that kind of business. Alex is actually going to Japan 2 weeks to meet with like Mitsubishi and Toshiba and Panasonic and a bunch of big companies there. In Europe, we have one of our main investors is from there, Schibsted. They own a lot. Yeah, they own a lot of marketplaces all over the world. Like they have a sister company called Adavinta that also owns a lot of marketplaces. So the idea over there is that whenever the market is ready, we'll power their circular marketplaces to show people like the CO2 impact of actually buying used goods instead of new goods. So that will help like with their business model. But that's why they invested in us so early. And then we have an apparel conglomerate in Norway using us as well, Partner Group. They have a bunch of brands that they own. Yeah, and like we get customers now because of our self-serve system. So if you go on our website, we wanted to make sure that mom and pop shops don't get left behind. So the smaller businesses, they can just go online, use it themselves, and it's really cheap for them to use it. So they don't have to pay thousands of dollars to consultants or like LCA experts or whoever. They can just go in and do the LCA themselves by putting in the same information they would put on their websites. Or if they're a Shopify store, it's all automated already. So you can just download the plugin. It will pull in your products and do it. With those ones, we know that they can't afford us. Like in a we can work with you and then we'll do these things for you kind of way. So we created like that self-serving piece of our technology, and then now we have a great partnership. We're collaborating with S&P. So we're the only platform in the world that powers the calculation with S&P data now, which is like a lot of global data that is like around assets and commodities and like companies and their operations. So like it is more regionally accurate because of that thing as well. And then a lot of consultants. So like EY, Deloitte, like Deloitte is in the earlier stages, but EY is like in a like really good space. But there's a couple more consultants like that where we're building custom terminals because they were taking so long to actually do the calculations, all these consultants, that they couldn't actually provide the service of reducing their emissions. So if they can use our technology to provide that as fast as possible and as accurately as possible, that allows them to do their jobs better as well. So yeah, we're building custom terminals for these consulting organizations who need to be able to measure emissions linked to finance or supply chains or any kind of sector.
But then it seems that you have to actually have the whole world in your database. Literally, like every single company doing anything really has to be in your database.
Yeah, I think so. That's where we have the transparency. Like our system can do calculations based at that most basic product level, which allows us to create the calculations at company level. And then public companies are easier to do than the private ones. But our thing has always been that, in the world of technology, we should be able to do these things. Like it's not a matter of like it's impossible. Like it's not like us trying to cure cancer. Large data models is already a thing.
Yeah.
Large language models is like the new big thing everyone knows about, but everyone knows about it as a consumer. Not everyone knows about it as how it could be utilized in business and in technology. So we feel like it's the information has always been out there, and all these companies have websites and their sources of data to organize it. And for us, I'm a big fan of Moore's law. So every 2 years, like we expect our data coverage to increase by twice as much. Just the same way the Silicon Valley revolution had happened over the last 60 years. So that's how we've been adding more and more databases. So we already have all the UN trade databases. So if the UN registers a trade between different regions, it's already in our system. So like if there's like global grids that change their electricity mix, already in our system. So now if you're tied to any of those components, that's where our technology can measure pretty accurately based on like how essentially the laws of supply and demand work across the world.
I can just imagine your server costs monthly. I have two kind of key questions that I really want to cover. One, you're obviously seeing a lot of data, which is probably different across different regions as well. So it's interesting to see your perspective on the data availability in different regions. But then the bigger question is, which we didn't touch upon, coming back to the team. What do you think was key to your success? Because it feels like in a very short amount of time, you actually have done so much that is just insane, really. So basically, yeah, talk about that.
Yeah. So what we've found is like it depends on who's asking. You know, if Lululemon asks their suppliers, give us X, they're already obligated under contracts to be able to do that. So people who have historically not have had a good relationship with their suppliers, they are actually at more of a disadvantage today because they know that they wouldn't necessarily gain from participating in that. But I'm going to Pakistan next year and I have a lot of manufacturing for like contacts there. And like, obviously I grew up there and all those things. So I actually want to empower the third world country users from our data at this point. So I'll be like, don't go for the lowest price common denominator, right? Like, don't just say that because you can make it the cheapest, you will win the bidding process. Here's a bunch of other things that you can educate. So I think we're really excited to now become an educational tool for third world country manufacturers and suppliers and incentivize them to upload more data and mitigate their own emissions, which will make them more attractive to first world country retailers and like, whatever those big name brands are. So we're doing both. So we're doing from the retailers, asking them, and depending on the relationship, they will cooperate, they will like provide information, but it will still be very bare minimum. And they will essentially, the company can see it, and 3 years from now, they can update their contracts for them to also include more data sharing. But then the other side is that the manufacturers who are already incentivized, like who are already supplying to these top retailers, like hoping to then start a bottom-up revolution there by actually giving them access, making them partners in the system. And I don't know if you know about Renewal Self, for example. Like I was like a news that came from Europe like last quarter, which like this huge, like it's a public company in Sweden, but they manufacture material for textiles from waste clothing. So like clothing that gets thrown out. And their profits, like their share price went down 75% because they said that they didn't have enough demand. And I'm like, why the only business model that should have the maximum demand doesn't have demand, while every Nike ad, every Adidas ad is talking about how a plastic bottle was taken to make this like t-shirt. I'm like, you have t-shirts coming out of t-shirts, buy them first before you start making new plastic bottles. And then like,
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, obviously the manufacturers, even in first world country, don't have enough recognition in there. So we're hoping that in our database, when people select regions, 2 years from now, they'll also be able to select manufacturers so that they can contact them directly for like those cleaner, better materials right away. So just linking those dots with as many stakeholders as possible as we build this technology. That's a long answer for everything. And then what was your second question? Sorry.
The second question was what contributed to your success? Because you have achieved so much in such a short amount of time. So, what do you think are the key things?
I would say the team that I've been really fortunate because I've been an individual contributor for the longest time possible. They're doing my own research projects and whatnot. The co-founding team, like I told you, at an organizational level has always been best logic wins, so no egos win. And that's kind of been like a really new room for me. Like even when we've grown, even when we've had more money or less money, or we've had to make tough decisions, we've always like had the opportunity to just lay out the logic. And if someone can bring a better logic, that one wins, and that can come from anyone, from our employees, from our investors. We don't have an ego involved that just because I came up with an idea it needs to happen. And I think the team that we were able to mentor over the last 3 years, they all wear so many different hats. So just how I'm a co-founder, but then also do data modeling, I also talk to suppliers. I'm not just saying that this is my scope, because everyone who's here is not just motivated for the money, is also for the impact and also the culture that we have created. So like we don't have a 9 to 5, we don't like time people in, we only monitor their contributions. Obviously we have certain fees and all those things, just because as we move and become a more serious company, we want to be able to protect everyone and the company. But what we've hated about the corporate world, we've kind of fought it off as much as possible at Arbor, which means that people bring their own version, not like a professionalized, or I call it bullshit version, which is just like using big words and not doing anything. So like we've been a big fan of like just thinking about, yeah, plans can be measured in decades, but execution is always measured in weeks. So if we can show something in weeks, when the first time we ever did anything, we were showing people things we have done in 12 hours in one day. So we were always like, yeah, the talking helps and it can be measured in a long time, but we have to always be executing and always be like, on pace to like not lose momentum. Just because we built stuff 3 years ago doesn't mean we need to stop building. Like you said, there's so much more data that we can increase the accuracy, and there's so much more things that we can measure. But yeah, I think all the credit goes to the team that they're able to run at this pace, because I feel like as founders you're always motivated to, but like there's 14 of us, and I can confidently say that each one of them could do 10 or 15 different jobs at any other big company just because of how good their skill sets are.
Nice. I mean, the team definitely is so, so, so important, and you have to trust everyone. But I really like what you said at the beginning, that your basically hobby time was participating in hackathons and hanging out around these sort of things. But if you had to just quickly elaborate a bit about, like, okay, so you started building it in hackathons, and now you are serving global customers and adding services and have a self-service platform and educating third world countries and working with the biggest brands of the world. What were the key milestones that actually got you here today?
Is that we still do hackathons every week.
Internally or as a team?
Internally. So we will go, like I'll go talk to businesses, Alex will go talk to investors, like Danny will go talk to like the operational teams and like all this stuff. And then we'll bring it all back and sit around Ben and we'll be like, okay, Thursdays is what we call build days, because we're like, this is what we've learned. This is the reasons why this didn't work or why this worked. And then we'll always have people asking us to expand into a new industry, expand into a new region. And it'll be like, okay, these are the conflict. So like we all bring different parts of expertise, but now our roles in the company have grown. But what hasn't changed is who we are as people and as individual contributors. So there's a role we play as operators. Just because we're operators, just because we have to sit down and make tough decisions, that doesn't mean we stop doing why we started doing this in the first place. And I think that gives me a lot of mental satisfaction, knowing that like I'm contributing at the pace that I feel like I'm still being valuable. I'm sure 5 years from now, we wouldn't need to do this. But if we didn't come in every Thursday asking people to be better and to build newer stuff, I feel like eventually you become like a country club. You just kind of sit down and stuff. And that's what we will never, as long as we're the operators, we will never allow this to be a country club. This needs to be like the hardest working workshop ever, just so like we can keep powering good information everywhere.
Are you still hiring students?
We only hired students. In the beginning, the people that we hired, our best leaders and best individual contributors is a 21-year-old data scientist who dropped out of university, a fresh graduate who've been promoted 4 times over the last 3 years and leads all of our product strategy, and a person who didn't even know how to design when we hired him, but now is the best UX UI designer, I would say, in Canada. And it's just that they did it for themselves. We obviously gave them opportunity, but like at this point, I let them do the mentoring to the newer folks. I feel like they're a better example to follow than, a founder saying a bunch of wise stuff.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't really hit.
How long, now quickly, the last questions. How long did it take you to close your first customer and the brand that you were like, wow, this is real?
I think the biggest one that we converted, it took us about 1 year to close. And I don't think we still have gotten to the feeling. Like we always say, this is the biggest person we've talked to yet. So like yesterday, I talked with the head of Department of Energy for US, and he was like, he's called the $400 billion man. And I was like, just reminding myself, just remember, like, this is the most important person you've talked to yet.
Yeah.
And like, you just kind of like keep your head straight and you just like keep going forward. Because a year ago, it was, a big CTO from a company. And then a year ago, it was our first investor, right? So like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's just a stepping stone. And for us, it's always been like, yeah, it might be a big name brand, but the job's not done. It's still just starting.
And then the investor, how long did it take you to close your first investment?
I would say not at all. It was very surprising because we met with someone that we actually like really respected, and that changed stuff. So he was like, he made a company in Toronto, sold it for like $700 million, and he came back to Calgary, and we were like, okay, tell us what to do. We don't know what to do, and we showed him the browser extension, like this first variation of Arbor that we had created, and we did it just to show it to him, nothing else. We had nothing else in mind. We're like, oh, we have 2 weeks before he comes to town, let's build something. Put something together. It's like, here's something that will make you understand. And he was like, I will invest in you as long as you guys promise you're not only going to do one thing and you will drop out. So he kind of like put us in our face that, okay, stop just playing around at university, you guys have the skill set, just jump into it and I will give you the starting money. And that's all we needed to hear. So I think it's all about that one champion who believes in you, who will want you to do more, not just give you money because you've done enough.
Yeah. I feel like I've learned a lot. I'm also in startup business, so this was a very good mentoring session for me.
Absolutely. It was really good.
And with that, I want to invite you to become a more conscious consumer, choosing products and brands that prioritize sustainability. Because every purchase you and I make directly shapes our planet's climate and ecology. Our choices matter, from the clothes we wear to the food we buy, each one step towards a healthier world. 8 billion steps every day. If you're a business owner or your company is seeking to measure and reduce its carbon footprint, connect with Arbor. Those innovative platforms offer precise data-driven solutions to make sustainability practical and impactful. You will find their link to their website on the page of Edge of Impact. Talk to the team and start building a smarter, greener future today. On that note, next week I will be bringing you another story from the Edge of Impact, and this time we will be jumping all across the world to Israel, where BeeVise is helping the world to save bees. See you next week at the Edge of Impact.